unless you have an arranged flight. I guess there was a belief that somehow the Taliban respects reservations. It turns out they don't. Private rescue efforts are facing growing obstacles this week, just as the urgency grows. Chartered planes are flying out of Kabul with hundreds of empty seats. New Taliban checkpoints on the road to Pakistan have made driving out of the country increasingly risky. Confusing bureaucratic hurdles have prevented countless people from leaving Afghanistan. That's the actual situation. And it would be funny, obviously, if people's lives weren't at stake, and they are. Here's one U.S. citizen, mom.
Heartbreaking.
Talking to Fox News on behalf of a lot of people who are, excuse me, Jen Psaki, who are stranded.
I know you have attempted to go to the airport multiple times. Can you tell us your situation and describe everything you've experienced so far?
Hi. Well, yes, I've made several attempts to go to the airport. First of all, I would like to thank the Fox News for letting me be the voice out there for many Americans stranded in Afghanistan. And yes, we are stranded. And I would like to thank Carol Miller, our congresswoman, and her team for her continuous effort. They have been in touch with me, and they have been my only strength here. Hearing their voices makes me feel comfortable and makes me hopeful that maybe I'll be able to make it back again home. So there's a lot of issues going on. We are stranded at home. We can't get to the airport. When we try to get to the airport, we either get beaten up or we're afraid for our lives.
I mean, that is heartbreaking.
Another woman spoke to a CBS News reporter, Iena Ruffini, who tweeted out what she said. They communicated by video. She's a translator from New Jersey, American citizen, female. She's been there for 15 years. She worked on a base with many of the people, many with pending special immigrant visa applications. And oh, by the way, Taliban said Afghans can't leave. We need the talent. So now extracting any more of our Afghan allies, that just became that much more difficult. She said she wants to go home, but she said, with respect to these families that are in this house hiding out with her, you know, she was asked, would you go home if you could? I am human. How could I leave these kids behind me to get killed? They will be in my head for the rest of my life that I left behind. So these are the kinds of choices people, American citizens, are making right now, as reported by Ruffini for CBS News. And that's where it's at. And at least, and you know, you should be inspired by America's citizens like that female translator that was referred to by that reporter that reporter spoke with, because at least she understands the moral imperative. Unfortunately, the administration does not. And so the incredible statements against the backdrop of our G7 allies pushing Biden to not hold himself fast to that August 31st deadline, because nobody truly believes that we'll be able to evacuate all the Americans, much less, and certainly not Afghan allies, by that date. And who could believe otherwise when you don't even know how many Americans you're supposed to evacuate? They still don't have a handle on the number that they've communicated to the public, at least. Against the backdrop of that, and the backdrop of the Taliban starting to close ranks, Afghanis can't leave. Women are supposed to stay in their homes until the Taliban decides what to do with them. That's encouraging. That inclusive government, we're supposed to believe the Taliban at a real crossroads in deciding what kind of dictatorship they want to be, what kind of nation they want Afghanistan to be. Yeah, that's a real open question. Gosh, who knows? That could really go either way.
They're not
President Biden?
Yeah, I mean, Biden even said, you know, they're going to have a free press. They're not, you know, they're going to be more inclusive to women. I mean, the fact that he even believed them for a second is laughable.
Absurdities. The vetting that is or isn't going on at these processing stations, very unclear. And the just general dismissal of the notion that leaving Americans behind is what going to be covered with. We evacuated the Americans who wanted to leave. We're going to assume that those who are still there didn't want to leave. That's the approach we're going to take. We're going to leave Americans behind purposefully. we're going to cater to the Taliban position on artificial, politically driven deadlines. It's a remarkable past 2 weeks. Depressing, horrific last 2 weeks. And it's actually getting worse instead of better, even despite the fact that more people have been evacuated. That's the good news. But everything else,
hundreds of thousands on the ground.
Well, we don't know. Everything else surrounding, though, this is a complete catastrophe, and the messages that will be indelibly emblazoned on the memories of our enemies. The lasting impact of this dumpster fire of an evacuation of a foreign policy team, frankly. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Rebekah Koffler, a Russian-born U.S. intel expert who worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency as well as the CIA's National Clandestine Service. She now works as an independent consultant, and she's got a new book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. You better hurry up. We got Americans that are busily on the job. Rebekah Koffler, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Yes, good morning, Dan. Happy to be here.
Since you were at CIA, I thought this was interesting. The report out yesterday that on Monday, the head of the CIA, Director Burns, there met with Taliban leaders. Boy, I'll tell you what, knowing what I know about the CIA now, my impression of the CIA now after the last 4 years is, gosh, the CIA meeting with them. And another time I would think, oh, that's important, and that could be something that results in a positive, that produces a positive development. Now I think, what else is the CIA conceding to the Taliban?
I know, this is completely astonishing, Dan, that CIA is now engaging with the Taliban, and Joe Biden himself, seems to be begging Taliban to release, to let Americans be flown back to their home country. I mean, this sort of complete misunderstanding of the national psyche of Afghans, is really, really, revealing to us. There's no wonder why the intelligence community and why the U.S. establishment has bungled up situations not only in Afghanistan, but Russia, China. It's because it's professional malpractice. They just simply don't understand foreign strategic cultures and how our adversaries think.
Yeah, and you're Russian-born, and you've done some extensive work and written a wonderful book. But what do you think Russia's role is going to be now? How soon do they swoop in, or are they already there?
Oh, they're already swooping. They've been swooping even before, the minute that Joe Biden announced very foolishly, the deadline. The Russians and the Chinese were all over this, filling the vacuum, and especially Putin. Putin conducted military drills with a couple of Central Asian nations, because Putin's ultimate goal is really to reconstitute the next Soviet Union. And so he's establishing control now, and his policy is basically everything that's good for America is bad for Russia and vice versa. So he is doing the same thing that he has always been doing, undermine U.S. interests, including U.S. national security interests.
So a lot of discussion about China and what this puts in China's mind about their interests in enveloping Taiwan. So what about Russian revanchism under Putin, and where does he go next? What is this input in Putin's mind about the next play that he could make, the next Crimea, the next Ukraine? Is it going to be the Baltic states? Where does he go?
So I would definitely not rule out, the Baltic states, because, as I said, his strategic ambitions are to reconstitute this so-called union, the Union. They're not going to call it the Soviet Union anymore, but they're calling it the Eurasian Economic Union. And they even dropped, colloquially, they use the phrase "the Union." Okay, but what I'm more concerned about, and what I actually have written a book about, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. I'm concerned about an actual kinetic conflict between Russia and the United States. We have already seen cyber attacks, relentless cyber attacks on our networks, including our critical infrastructure. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, in terms of the Russian threat. And the U.S. government doesn't want Americans to know about the extent of this threat. And this is why it tried to censor my book. It tried to prevent Americans from knowing exactly what Putin is up to with regard to our country.
Well, okay, so to develop that a bit more for us, I mean, you're talking about armed conflict with the Russians. I mean, we've had some skirmishes as we did in Syria in the previous regime, but previous administration. But I mean, what's the play? I mean, first of all, I don't know what it would take for Joe Biden to scramble combat troops. But what does Putin have in mind? Where would he like to see or be willing to endure armed conflict with the United States?
Sure. So the Russians have developed doctrines for what is called new generation warfare, or they call it also strategy of indirect action or asymmetric strategy, whereby they are seeking to effectively bypass our superior conventional capability and use the so-called asymmetric weapons, such as cyber, such as space, counter-space, such as, undersea drones, and all kinds of things that Putin has been developing since 2008, pretty much. But they're planning to wage this conflict, what's called below the threshold of U.S. military response. They want to destabilize our society through all these means. This is why they interfered in our elections, not to elect Trump, contrary to what the intelligence community told Americans. This was a big lie. But to destabilize the country by sowing discord and fomenting unrest. And in terms of the actual kinetic conflict, they've been practicing strategic bomber overflight, strategic Navy sailing close to our waters. And our own commanders, several of whom I briefed myself from combatant commands, specifically from NORTHCOM, have already warned us that U.S. homeland is not a sanctuary in terms of Russian capability. And routinely, they breach our air defense zone, practicing those drills in the event that conflict escalates into the kinetic realm.
Well, so where's our vulnerability? Where do the Russians think our vulnerability is? I mean, besides the Facebook ads to sow discord, I mean, we do a good enough job of that ourselves. We don't need much help from them. But what about using new generation warfare? What kind of is that an electric grid attack? I mean, what's the thinking there?
Absolutely, yes. So the Russians have this concept that if you hit America at the right spot, the entire system collapses. It's basically hitting in the center of gravity. This is their response, so to speak, to our network-centric warfare concept. So taking down electrical grid is on the table. Now, obviously, this is not going to happen like a bolt out of the blue sky, but through a sequence of what's called cascading events that is very easily achievable in the cyber realm. And every single network of ours is vulnerable. They have already, attacked and intruded and exfiltrated data out of multiple networks, but more concerningly, our critical infrastructure is vulnerable. They have penetrated everything, including our nuclear facilities and even our strategic, food and gasoline reserves. And they're mapping out accesses, and we just simply have not responded, nor have we protected our networks. And Biden keeps having meetings and having, big pronouncements how he's going to respond to Putin. But bottom line, the Russians have ransacked our networks for 20 years. The very first covert operation was called Moonlight Maze, was back more than 20 years ago, and we have done nothing to protect our network. That's why I'm concerned.
It's sobering. Rebekah Koffler, she's Russian-born U.S. intel expert who worked with the Defense Intelligence Agency as well as the CIA's National Clandestine Service, now works as an independent consultant. The book, Putin's Playbook, Russia's Secret Plan to Defeat America. Rebekah, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer.
Your show keeps me alive during the week. There's nobody I'd rather listen to between 5 and 9 in the morning than you guys.
On AM 560, The Answer.
PGS Golden Coin is having a grand opening event, and they're giving away a $500 gold